Hey, I'm Jimmy Dillon, and welcome to the Acoustic Cafe. We're going to be talking about songwriting and acoustic guitar and how they relate to each other. And before we get started, I wanted to tell you a little bit about where I come from musically and where I was born and what my influences were. You know, I was born in Los Angeles, California in the 50s, what I consider the golden age of rock and roll. So it was getting into my bones at a very young age. I remember picking up an Elvis record and, you know, dancing around the house and pretending I was playing guitar like this. Of course, I was about 7 years old at the time. And then what happened was, you know, I was raised on radio. So being raised on radio in the 50s was such a cool time to come up because it was the first time we'd all heard music like this. You know, it was called rock and roll. Up till then, it had been, you know, mostly stuff like Sinatra and big band stuff, and then into the early rock and roll, you know, like Little Richard and Elvis and Gene Vincent and all that good stuff. But by the time I came of age and I realized I wanted to play guitar, it was the 60s. So the early 60s, I'm really a child of the 60s in terms of my formative years on playing guitar. So that little intro I did for you, I was doing a little kind of a little Bob Dylan. You can't really mention the 60s and you can't really mention songwriting and acoustic guitar specifically without mentioning the giants that were, you know, all over the place on the radio and influencing us all in social ways and other ways, because we're going to talk about songwriting in this product. We're going to talk about lyrics. We're going to talk about inspiration. I'm going to tell you how it strikes me and how I work with inspiration and how I channel it through my acoustic guitar primarily, a little bit of piano as well. But I think this particular instrument is the consummate instrument for the last, you know, really 50, 60, more, 100 years. And there's a reason for that. I was talking to one of the guys here at the studio. And, you know, guitar, especially acoustic guitar, you can take it with you. It goes up against your body. You play it, you feel it, the vibration of the strings. And it's a great writing tool. You can write anywhere you are. It's a mobile instrument. You know, it travels with you. So that's really cool. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about my influences growing up. By the time I was playing acoustic guitar, I was living in Michigan near Chicago, so I had some blues influence. Because I was hearing guys from Chicago like Howlin' Wolf and Muddy Waters and, of course, more of the electric stuff as well. But primarily we're talking about acoustic stuff here. So John Lee Hooker, who I was fortunate enough to do a duet with, an acoustic duet. That was my early influence, as well as simultaneously the Beatles, the Stones, Traffic, Stevie Winwood, all the great British acoustic rock guys. So if we're talking about acoustic songwriting, you can't leave out the Beatles, you can't leave out Bob Dylan, and, you know, guys like Leonard Cohen, who have been phenomenal and influenced all of us. So I think to some degree we have to say, as acoustic guitar players and as writers, we derive from the greats. And I would first of all encourage you to study the masters, because that's what I did. I came up with this stuff, and I still go back and listen to Dillon all the time. I love Mark Knopfler. As a matter of fact, I just wanted to show you, this is kind of funny. I came across this thing. Isn't this great? Now, this is Bob Dylan and Mark Knopfler performing together. And here's two of my greatest influences right there. I was upstairs in the studio, and we're going to be wandering around and showing you some different aspects of songwriting today. But so I just wanted to tell you a little bit about what my influences were. And if you listen to early Bob Dylan, if you're a Dylan fan, or even if you're not, you have to kind of say, here was a guy who was innovative in his lyrics, in his delivery. Even his voice was something we hadn't heard before. And I can remember hearing, you know, waking up in the morning and listening to the radio and hearing, hey, Mr. Tambourine Man, play a song for me. I'm not sleepy and there ain't no place I'm going to. We all remember that, right? And if you don't remember it, you should go back and check it out. Because that was the first time we heard this rambling, amazing lyrical content in an acoustic setting, stark setting. A guy with his harmonica, his guitar, and his vocals, and his delivery with this great look and vibe. And I got to tell you, it was a tempest in a teapot. It was revolutionary in the sense that you got rock and roll going on. You got all the old 50s rock and roll. You got the Beatles, the Stones, the big sounds. And then you got this skinny dude from Minnesota coming forward with his acoustic guitar and his cutting, incredible lyrics that were so pertinent to the time. And we were in a time of social upheaval. You talk about the Vietnam War. I was of age at that time. So I felt this music in a visceral way and in a, an emotional way too. But, I was talking to Bruce over here, and we were talking about, Bob Dylan wrote some incredible social commentary type pieces, and A Hard Rain's Gonna Fall, and things that were really, really to the times. But he also wrote some of the most tender, heartfelt love songs of all time as well. Just Like a Woman, things like that. Songs like A Girl from the North Country. And I don't want to stay on Dillon too long because we're going to get to my original stuff, but I want to let you know that this is where my inspiration originally came from as a young guy. I wrote my first song when I was 13 years old. I'm not going to play it for you because I don't even remember it. I know it was in the key of E, and it had kind of one of these kind of things going. And I think it was called Where Love Won't Find Me. And I got to say, at age 12 or 13, I hadn't experienced a lot of, if any, romantic love yet. But I still was writing from a place of what I thought a song should be about. And, I think songwriting is different for everybody. Where does inspiration strike you? Well, it strikes in unlikely places, It could strike you, sitting in a train station by yourself, maybe in a faraway land, which has done so for me many, many occasions. Some of the songs that I consider to be my very best, one of them was written in a hotel room in the south of France in a really, really old hotel. And it's a song that is really about being in a place where you're missing home and the longing of loved ones. And it could be construed as being a love song. It could also be construed as being a spiritual song for that kind of longing, which I think is something that we all feel. And when you talk about the blues is a feeling, and it's also something that prompts a lot of songwriting, but it comes in lots of different forms, doesn't it? It could come in a folk form. It doesn't have to always be in a blues form, but it's really just telling a story. Now this song here that I'm playing for you was a song that I recorded. It was originally inspired while I was on tour in Europe, and I was missing home. I was missing all the things that we miss when we're in a place. I didn't speak the language. I was living in France at the time, and it's called As I Make My Way, and I'm going to play a little bit of it for you and give you an idea of how I write, where my inspiration comes from. It goes like this. Well, I was as lost and lonely as one man could be. Let something deep and sad between you and me. Wandered far and wide all across this land, only to return with my heart down in my hand. As I make my way, as I make my way, oh yeah, as I make my way, on back to you. I will hold you in my arms every night and day, keep you safe from harm, baby, evil in its way. Wrap my love around you like a circle in the sun, and every rainy day give you shelter from the storm. As I make my way, as I make my way, oh yeah, as I make my way, on back to you. Now I've been loving you such a long, long time. Road to freedom, girl, it was always on my mind. I've been out here long enough to see. Now I'm coming back to you as I make my way. As I make my way, oh yeah. I will call upon the spirit of love to pull me through. Though my hands are trembling, I'll find my way to you. I'll shake off these blues, stand straight and true till my dying day. Love I feel for you, baby, will never ever fade. As I make my way, as I make my way, oh yeah. As I make my way, on back to you, girl. On back to you. So that's an example of a song that it's actually been very popular for me. I recorded that in Europe, and it sold really well in Europe, ironically, and it was about me missing being back home here in the States. Now, that was written specifically, you know, with something in mind, with a feeling in mind, an emotion in mind. But I want to talk about songwriting in general, especially on acoustic instruments, whether it's guitar or whatever your instrument is. And I recognize that a lot of the folks I'm talking to out here are acoustic guitar players, so I really want to center on this beautiful instrument and how we can use this to inspire ourselves. I've read a lot about, I was reading a little story about songwriters on songwriting and how inspiration and how songwriting and lyrics strike different people, where it comes from, what's the source. And there's lots of ideas, and I think honestly it's different for everyone. But one thing I did notice that's consistent in my reading and in my experiments and also in my experience, a lot of times it starts out right here with a guitar. Now for me, it starts with myself in the morning, in the quiet hours of the morning. I'm an early morning person these days. I wasn't always, so I'll share that with you, and that's another story. But these days, I like to wake up with this guitar. Generally, I have a series of guitars in my home, and I'm going to show you all of them before the day is through. But I basically sit with maybe this guitar. I'll have a cup of coffee and my cat Max, who you're going to meet later. And I'll have my iPhone handy too, or some device that I can record with, because what happens for me, this is just my experience, is when I'm waking up and before I've had time to get into the day and all the thoughts and the worries and the concerns that we have in our everyday lives, my brain is not really engaged yet. And I'm finding that where authentic creativity lives for me is not in the thinking mind often. It's in the instinctual mind, or the, oh yeah, I mean, I guess, I don't know if instinctual mind is a saying, but my instincts are a lot truer than often when I'm trying to overthink things or be clever with lyrics and stuff. So I don't really question it. I would say maybe the intuitive mind is also a good way to put it. But as a musician, I've come to a place where it's second nature for me, whether I'm, you know, playing acoustic, electric, whatever I'm playing. And so what happens is I trust that. I trust in my intuition and my instincts regarding that. I don't really need to think a lot about what I'm playing. I just let it come out. And if you can get to that place with acoustic guitar where you're comfortable enough that you're not thinking scales or what key am I in, but you're just letting it flow. That for me is often where the best stuff comes out. So where it all begins for me, quite often, is not the most romantic place on a train in Europe, although I've done that. I wrote a song with my buddy Ozzy Allers, and we were sitting on a train. We had nothing. We had no guitars, no nothing, just a book, a couple of magazines, and we had the rolling of the train, I'm in trouble, can't get you out of my mind. A lot of cultures don't have stringed instruments. They just have a rhythm thing going. So it's where you find it. Once again, we wrote an entire song on just a couple of books and beating our hands with the sound of the train in the background, the rolling of the train. And it ended up being a fun song called Trouble. And it's on an album that Van Morrison's on and a whole bunch of other people are on it. This guy named Chris Farlow covered it. And so you never know where it's going to go. You never know it's going to start. You never know where it's going to go. I'm not really in the business of outcomes. It's not for me to say where my children go, because these are my children, these songs. And I honestly feel like this year going to get different from everybody. I feel like I'm sort of a conduit. It just sort of comes through me. Where the big picture comes from, that's a whole other thing. But back to where, the actual nuts and bolts, the actual, mechanics of songwriting. I've heard it said many times, and for me this is true, songwriting is a discipline, like anything else in life. Whether you're a sports person or whatever you are, whatever you do, repetition breeds confidence. It really does. So, I was talking to my buddy Matt, and he was saying, you got to write 100 or 200 or maybe even 1,000 songs before you write your true first song. And I think that's true to an extent. I mean, some of us are more, maybe talented in a certain way. Some of us are lyricists. Some of us are, very good with wordsmithing or wordcraft, and that's the writing of lyrics. But as you may have noticed through the years, there's been some great songwriting teams. So quite often, songwriting doesn't always have to be a solo experience. I've written a lot of collaborative stuff. I wrote a song called "You Bring the Whole Town Down" with a guy called Alex Call, great songwriter. And he writes in Nashville now in the country style. But he wrote a song called "Jenny Jenny," 8675309, which you might have heard, big hit. He co-wrote "Power of Love" for Huey Lewis. He's written a lot of great songs, "Little Too Little, Little Too Late," I think, for Pat Benatar. And I mention that because I think collaborating is a great thing. Bernie Taupin and Elton John, they write together. Bernie's in one room writing lyrics, and I think they did an album called Two Rooms. And then you got Elton John who does the music. So it doesn't have to always be two guys in one room, although that works as well. And I'm going to illustrate that on a couple of original songs that I've come up with that I wrote with my buddy Ozzy. But, I wanted to go back just for a second because sometimes you have to look back to find out where you are. And for me, as I mentioned before, we talked about the 50s growing up and then talked about the 60s, the folk scare of the 60s. And then, of course, at the end of the 60s, we had this amazing proliferation of talent and songwriters. And before there was the Bob Dylans and the Beatles and all that stuff, most of the songwriting that was done by songwriting teams like the Brill Building in New York, as you're probably familiar with, people like Carole King and Goffin and King, songwriting teams, Boyce and Hart, a lot of great songwriters back then. And in the blues idiom, guys like Willie Dixon, who wrote Hoochie Coochie Man and a lot of classic tunes. So back in the day, there were songwriters and there were performers. There was Sinatra, and there was people who wrote the classic songs like, Noel Coward, and people that wrote songs for plays and for musicals. A lot of the original stuff came from there. So if it wasn't blues and it wasn't, that style of music, Fats Waller and that kind of stuff, most of the stuff that was coming up on the radio back in the day was written for shows. My Fair Lady and Oklahoma and that kind of stuff. So a lot of the classic great old songs came from there. And then, of course, came our generation coming up, 60s. And all of a sudden, bands and musicians like Dillon and the Beatles and the Stones were writing their own songs. This was a revolutionary concept. This had not happened before. And that's where we're coming from. So that's really the legacy that I look to. And so I'm moving forward in time because I want to share my experience as a composer and as a songwriter. And I want to do it kind of in a chronological style. So if you think back to the late 60s, early 70s, realized we had stuff when we were talking about the complete genius of James Taylor's playing, you know. I mean, we all know what song that is, right? I mean, you just know it from the first note. Fire and Rain, obviously. But I think when I first heard James Taylor, it really blew my mind. Just the way he picks and accompanies himself on the acoustic guitar. You know, you can listen to his stuff, and it's almost like a whole orchestra is happening with his fingerstyle picking. And he owns that hammer-on stuff. You know? And granted, there were some great artists before that. Paul Simon's done some great, you know, great voicings and picking that, you know, as soon as you hear that acoustic guitar, you know the song. But for instance, one of the early James Taylor songs that I kind of learned, and which also informed a lot of my songwriting later, was a song like this one. Well, the sun is surely sinking down, moon is slowly rising, this old world must still be spinning round, and I still love you. So close your eyes. You can close your eyes, it's alright. I don't know no love songs, I can't sing the blues anymore, and I can sing this song. You can sing this song when I'm gone. Isn't that a beautiful piece of music? Right now I want to take apart this particular song as I make my way and talk about how a song is built, what a hook is, because the hook is at the center of a song. So if a hook is what really gets a song across, the acid test for that is when you walk away, are you humming it? Right, a couple minutes later. We've all heard songs where you hear it once and you're already humming the hook when you walk away. That sounds like a hit, right? That's the payday on that. Now on this particular song, we're going to take this apart, we're going to talk about Western music. Generally, you have a verse, you have a chorus, you might have a bridge, or we used to call it a middle eight, that's what they call it in England. And you might have a B section that connects it. These are all things that connect. Now, it was just pointed out, you need to have a basic understanding of guitar. So you gotta know your chords so that you can create a song. If you don't know your chords, in this case, we're talking about the simplicity of 3 chords and the truth. Some of the great songs, many of which you've heard, they might only have 3 chords or maybe a relative minor, but they still have a dynamite hook. And we're gonna keep talking about how to create that hook and what makes a good hook. Now in the case of this song, we start out with a melody on the guitar. Now that's a little bit of a mini hook on its own, in the same way that I played some of the James Taylor stuff earlier. Sometimes you'll hear an entrance to a song and you'll go, oh, I recognize that. And that's a whole art to songwriting. Sometimes you can write a song that everybody swears they've heard before, but they haven't. And that's good songwriting. You know, it kind of rings something, it resounds in the collective consciousness. In this case of this song, we're talking about, here's 3 chords that everybody can play: a G, a C, and a D. And I add enough sharp here. And I mention that because as an acoustic guitarist and a songwriter, it's important to understand different voicings so that you can write something that doesn't sound, too simple, where it's not interesting for people to hear. And that's why I mentioned some of the classic Paul Simons and James Taylor, because they were and are masters of acoustic guitar songwriting. So that's why it's important to study the masters. But let's get back to my stuff and how I do it. The verse, I'm telling a story. Well, I was as lost and lonely as one man could be. Let something deep inside between you and me. I'm telling a story, right? I wandered far and wide all across this land, only to return with my heart down in my hands. Now, I've only used 3 chords. I've set up the song. I had a nice hooky little intro, and I told a story. I set up a story. I didn't hit him over the head, but I got him ready for the hook. And here's the hook. As I make my way, 3 chords again. As I make my way, oh yeah. Repetition. As I make my way, payoff. Back to you. Encompassed in that hook was a melody. There was a variation on the melody, but there was that repetition driving that hook home. So I repeated the same line 3 times in different ways, and then I brought it all home back to you. Now, that's a very simple way to do it, but the greatest songs are simple. And the ones that really get through, the hooks that get through are often very, very simple. We were talking about what is a hook? You know, what is it about a hook that gets you? Well, it's several things. It's the melody, how the melody hits you. It's the lyric content, how that hits you. Could be a very, very simple line, I can't get no satisfaction, you know? Everybody knows what that means. But when you heard the intro to that, that's a hook too. So there's many ways that a hook can happen in a song. Sometimes you'll hear a song where it's got maybe 3 or 4 great hooks in it. Some of the more contemporary, you know, bands like, Maroon 5, you know, it's just a continuation of hooks. Now, sometimes what happens is, we were talking about the difference between a really esoteric, fantastic lyrical song that has no hooks. There's that. And there's a place for that. You know, there's a place for music that, you know, kind of makes you work for it. But what we're really addressing here is the creative process of writing a song that has a very strong hook that gets people to, it goes into people and they really feel it and hear it. So in the case of As I Make My Way, I can tell you that that's the most popular song I've written. I've played that song. It's sold a lot of copies in Europe. I've done pretty well here. And in terms of the word success, I mean, that's defined a lot of different ways too. If success is only selling units, that's okay. Sure, there's nothing wrong with selling 1 million units. There are singer-songwriters that have written great songs that have not necessarily been radio hits per se. So there's lots of ways to measure success. Success is also doing what you love and making a living doing it. To some degree, I wish I could tell you a foolproof way to write a hit song and it's going to be a hit every time. Anybody that tells you that is not telling you the truth. That's not the way it goes. If I could tell you how to write a hit song over and over and have a hit and a million seller, I'd be doing it myself. There's a mysterious component to the artistic, creative endeavor that is not predictable by nature. So I'm not going to pretend I can explain to you every time if you write it this way, it's going to be a hit, because lots of variables exist. Not the least of which is the changing face of our society and earth and music, and the face of music. If that were true every time, music would be a very, very sad, boring thing, and we'd never have to stretch out and work and be aware of what's going on. So I won't tell you that there's a foolproof way to always write a hit, but I can show you what the heart of a hook is. You know, the heart of a hook is something that, again, that a collective consciousness feels. It resounds in a lot of different ways to a lot of different people. You've probably seen interviews with great songwriters like Dillon, like Elvis Costello, even Tom York from Radiohead, all these different people that have been pertinent, the guy from Coldplay, Chris Martin. They have one thing in common. They know how to write great melody, great hooks, great songs that are pertinent to the time they're in. So they're contemporary. We just did a modern acoustic guitar product, and I got into some of the more modern people like Jack Johnson, you know, and how, you know, sometimes it's It's the same old wine in a brand new bottle because there's, you know, as Bill Shakespeare said, there's nothing new under the sun. You can take an influence and you can rewrap it and twist it and be inspired by something you heard before and do your own twist on it. All of a sudden you've got new music, a new hook. So I just wanted to show how, in the case of a finger picking thing with three chords, that song works really well. Now let's talk a little bit about bridges, because a bridge is something that some people might be mystified by. A bridge is exactly what it says it is. It bridges two parts of a song. Some songs don't have bridges. Some songs are very simple. And it just goes over and over and over, and the only thing that changes is the lyric and the chorus, and the verse, chorus. But it's cool to write a bridge too. Now, in particular on this song, I'm very proud of this bridge. It really worked out well. We were doing a verse and then a hook chorus. And then I wanted to go to a different place. So I wanted to modulate. What does modulate mean? That means to move up. So you've heard modulations in lots of different songs. You'll recognize it when you hear it. But in this case, I wanted to get up to A. I wanted to lift the song, because you'd heard the hook a couple of times, you heard the verse, you got what the song is about. Now I want to take you someplace different to freshen the song up, to lift the song. That's the function of a bridge. In this case, I had done my chorus. On back to you. Then I do a little rest, and I jump up to a bridge. I go. Now this is a little like a D-E with an F sharp and a G sharp in the bass. I'm not going to get too technical into this, but I want to let you know, as an acoustic guitar player, how I pull this off so that you can understand it and understand what a bridge can be. That brings me up because I've gone from a D to an E. So now I can go to my root, my one chord in the key of A. Now I've gone from G, and that bridged me to A. Now I'm in a whole different part of the song. This is a bridge, and now I'm taking the song up to a little bit of a different height. So I've been loving you such a long, long time. Road to freedom, girl, it was always on my mind. I've been out here long enough to see. Now I gotta find a way to get back to the original one chord, the G. So I'm climbing on an A to a C sharp on the bass, and then I've gone to a D. And I know that the D is the 5 to the G chord, so then that takes me back to a G. Now I'm coming back to you. So I've completed a complete circle right there. So I went up to an A, and I climbed like that, and then I went to a B minor, got a nice little mood enhancer there. And lyrically, I'm talking about what I did. I went out there, I searched the world, and I came back home to you. So the lyrics and the music work together there, you see. I've been loving you such a long, long time. It's a little grittier. The road to freedom, girl, it was always on my mind. I've been out here long enough to see. Now I know I've got to bring it all back home. I got to get back to the hook again. Now I'm coming back to you. And here we are, as I make my way. So we've caused some tension in the song. It's not boring. So make my way, oh yeah. And you're back home to that hook. So you've driven that hook home, but you took it somewhere else so that the hook is more meaningful when you come back to it. You can't just have a hook over and over and over. You're gonna be boring. You have to have other components to frame that hook. If you don't have a verse that leads up to the hook, you've just got a hook that repeats itself. It might be a catchy line. It's not going to work. You have to have something compelling both before the hook and after the hook to frame the hook. Otherwise, the song is not going to be complete. So having that bridge there takes me back to the hook. And then you might ask yourself, okay, what's next? What's missing in a great song? Well, something called a solo.